Hey friends, Dean here. Before we get you on to your episode, I want to take a moment to invite you to our next virtual online trivia night. Wednesday, May 13th at 8 p.m. Join us either on our Facebook group or on our YouTube page for 3 rounds of fun trivia, music questions, movie questions, general knowledge questions. It'll be a fun time and a chance to win some prizes and have just a good relaxing night of some trivia at home. You don't even have to go out for it. So don't forget, Wednesday, March 13th at 8 p.m. Join us on our Facebook group or YouTube for 3 rounds of fun virtual online trivia. We'll see you there. In this episode, we're catching up with the Beatles in 1969 as they prepare to perform live for the first time in 3 years in Peter Jackson's expansive documentary, Get Back. Stay with us.
Get ready for the 3324 podcast, where lifelong friends Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber share their love of all things music and movies. Dean has directed short films and is a music trivia buff, and Eric, trained in audio engineering, brings his extensive knowledge of music and film to the conversation as they discuss, debate, and celebrate their favorite albums, films, and much more.
Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast. Thank you for joining us. Dean Legiro here. Eric Kuber recovering from his Thanksgiving turkey hangover, I believe. I think he's awake, right? You're
I'm
there.
Here. I'm present.
He's there. He is there. I am pumpkin pied out. I can tell you that much.
Oh,
how did you do over the Thanksgiving weekend?
No, the meal was fine.
Good. Awesome. Well, that's all there is. We've got special guest with us making his second appearance. The great, the formidable multi-hyphenate blogger, City of Kick. You can go check out his blog there. Nick Leshi. Welcome, Nick. Happy Thanksgiving as well.
Likewise. Thanks for having me back. I guess that's a good sign that you invited me back.
Yeah, good to see you again.
Yeah, your name came up on the wheel. We have a wheel of guests, just like we have a wheel when we give away prizes in our live shows. We have a wheel of guests, and you came up. So it's like, all right, let's see what Nick wants to do. So actually, Nick, it was your comment on our social media page. We have a Facebook group, 3324 Podcast, and Nick is one of the experts that we have designated for, and he mentioned how much he is a Beatles fan and loves the Beatles. I didn't know you were into the Beatles that much, so it was like, yeah, we've got this new documentary that was just released November 25th and 26th on Disney Plus, or 25th and 27th actually came out Saturday. The last part. It's available on Disney Plus. It's directed by Peter Jackson, by the way, or through Michael Lindsay Hogg, who actually is the director of all the footage that you see. This is a streaming event in 3 parts, close to 8 hours in total length. And this was culled from 60 hours of video and 150 hours of audio from the Beatles' sessions when they were recording what would be their final album, Let It Be. At the time, they did not know that that's what it was going to be. There was supposed to be a television show associated with this, and that's where the filming came in. Is Michael Lindsay Hogg had directed a lot of stuff for the Rolling Stones, filmmaker back then. Little side fact, he is supposedly Orson Welles' son. His mother is Geraldine Fitzgerald, and she told him very young that, I think your father is Orson Welles. He actually looks like him a little bit, especially when he smokes the cigar in the footage.
Yeah,
you can almost see the resemblance, but supposedly the rumor is that he's his illegitimate son. So Michael Lindsay Hogg directed all the original footage from 1969 of the Beatles. He assembled it into a film called Let It Be, which surrounds the making of what would be their final album. That movie is no longer available. It came out briefly on VHS, tons of bootlegs. You really actually don't see anything of it on YouTube. But what it did is, for that film, it kind of showed the Beatles, warts and all. The perspective of Let It Be was, here's a band that is in the last throes of its lifespan and in the process of breaking up. Let It Be had become, the film had become the de facto document of how the Beatles were at this period, because it does show them in more of an argumentative light, not getting along, bickering. It just has a somewhat of a darker feel to it. The new project was supposed to be released in September of 2020. 20. It was supposed to be a 2.5-hour feature film from Peter Jackson. The pandemic happened. So according to Peter Jackson, is the project got put on hold. He wasn't hearing from anybody, but him and his team just continued working on the project. We're just going to keep going. And they initially whittled, the 60 hours of footage and 150 hours of audio whittled down into an 18-hour cut.
And which then is eventually his preferred cut, apparently.
Well, if you know anything about Peter Jackson, here's the opportunity.
Yeah, he doesn't do anything small. No way.
no half measures for Peter Jackson. No. So you'll know him mainly from his Lord of the Rings work, King Kong, The Hobbit. And if you look at any of those movies or film trilogies, they all have super deluxe, expanded, extra, ultra, massive, definitive, this is the final word edition that are ultra long. So yeah, he is not known for brevity.
No, is
that fair to say?
I think so. I think what it really comes down to, though, is like you could argue that it's very self-indulgent work, but I don't know. I think he managed to achieve something that most filmmakers don't. I think, in the sense that he got to cover all the bases of his childhood. Really made something about his favorite band, honored his great grandfather with the World War I doc with the same technology. His favorite film he got to remake with King Kong, and then of course he got to adapt his favorite book. So, that's quite impressive. Something to admire, I think, from whether you like the stuff or not. That's just another story. It definitely requires you to make a commitment and take a day or two or three to actually see everything. But yeah. So.
Nick, had you seen his World War I documentary?
I did not.
Did you ever get a chance to see? I saw that in the theater.
Stuff. Frighteners, right? He did Frighteners. He did the King Kong, which I didn't know if that was a movie that needed to be remade, especially after the 70s version that got made again. It's like, why? But he did it in a way that really, it worked for him. Like, he captured the era instead of setting it like in present day, like the 70s version did. And it was a little bit romantic. I think it was miscast a little bit, had some issues. His Jack masterpiece, Black. Of course, is
Calling Jack
Black. And not only did he remake the film, but he also produced the making of the original film, which is even better. If you ever get a chance to check that out, I think it's called RKO.
Okay.
Something like it's the name of the project,
right?
And he produced it with his Wingnut Film production company, and had luminaries come on and talk about the film too. So it was a passion project, I think. So he
definitely doesn't do things half measures.
Right.
Connects,
exactly.
I like what you say, passion project. He really connects to something that he feels passion for.
Yeah.
And that was the Lord of the Rings trilogy. That was something that people thought couldn't be adapted into a live action.
Right.
And, for them to commit to 3 movies, right? That first one could have flopped, and he was shooting them back to back, right?
Yeah.
So that was a big commitment, and I thought that was his masterpiece and his genius effort.
Hobbit,
I have issues with The Hobbit, again,
of course.
stretching it out. I thought he should have just started with The Hobbit and done that one as a standalone film. That would have been the test project, and then do The Lord of the Rings. But
he didn't want to, though. He didn't want to do The Hobbit.
Exactly.
Guillermo del Toro was supposed to do it. That would have been interesting to see, but unfortunately, it didn't happen. And I guess too much money was spent. And he was waiting to get it greenlit, and everything just, he had to do it. And
there you have it.
So there's the results. But
I had issues with his, with The Hobbit, his technique of shooting and, the different frame rates. Yeah. And I don't know how he did it with this one, but Get Back looked beautiful. I thought,
it did.
I don't know what the original footage looked like. I never saw the Let It Be theatrical film. But this looked great. I mean,
it really did.
Looked beautiful.
Yeah, I think there was some new technology employed for this film.
Yeah,
especially from what I've read or heard, that the audio, because there's 150 hours of audio as well, and what the Beatles will start here, I guess. What the Beatles started figuring out is that there was microphones placed everywhere, and some were hidden, so they would want to have conversations outside of the microphones, but since the microphones were everywhere, someone would strum a guitar really, really loud. So the microphones would pick it up, but then they could have their conversation in person
Yeah.
and not be heard. 50 years later, they now have the technology to isolate the guitar sound so a computer knows what it's looking for, to remove that sound, to then hear the conversations that they didn't want to have heard.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So the Beatles were kind of ahead of the curve at the time, saying, "Hey, we'll just kind of throw a wrench in this by overfeeding the guitars or strumming them really loud and creating a lot of noise in the mic, and then we'll have our conversation." But they were able to. Now in 2021, they can remove that, isolate the conversations and get to it. So a lot of amazing technology was employed here. Like I said, 60 hours of footage, of filmed footage, and 150 hours of audio. So going through that, it takes discipline, right? Yeah. And he's an admitted fan. So there's going to be maybe a little, not bias, but a little fan service in there, right? If he's looking at something saying, wow, this is really cool, and this is something I'd want to see, that's where you end up with 8 hours. And I think that's where some of the feedback online about it has been, this is just a lot of conversation. It's too much talking. Where's the action? And there's a lot of action in there, but you're getting a glimpse at a time and a band, a glimpse in a way you've never seen them before. Right, Nick?
Yeah, it's like being right there when they were rehearsing. With my theater background, sometimes you go to these rehearsals and it could be deadly dull, right? But if it's, a classic production and you're there and you're seeing geniuses at work, you see their process. And that's how I felt I was in the room with them. I felt like they weren't cognizant sometimes of the cameras, and that's where the vulnerability comes through. And other times they were very aware of the cameras and the microphones, and that's where they sometimes hammed it up. Sometimes, they were like, you could see Paul at times saying, this shouldn't be for now, And then that time when Paul and John go to talk in private and they have the hidden microphone at the table, they didn't know
in the cafeteria,
right. They didn't know they were being recorded.
That's rough. In the flower pot, yeah.
I wish they had done that at Ringo's house when they went to get George back. Sure. When you hear it, that would have been fantastic.
Yeah. So let's start the story. So basically, the project is that there was going to be a television show featuring the Beatles, featuring them performing live for the first time in 3 years. They stopped effectively touring in 1966. They kind of, again, we've told this story many times before. We want to be in the studio. We want to explore that as a tool. We don't need to perform anymore. So the project was, hey, let's kind of film you getting an album together, getting the songs together, and then giving a televised show where you're playing live again for the first time. So they were, to varying degrees, okay with it, I guess. So the setup is there's this giant studio, Twickenham Studios in England. Ringo Starr was supposed to be shooting a film there in a few weeks called The Magic Christian with Peter Sellers. So they already had, the studio was already rented. So there was a time space of 2 or 3 weeks where the Beatles could use this studio, work up the songs, and get it figured out. And I think that was, so when we talk about Twickenham, which is kind of like the first part of the documentary, that is probably the most depressing part of this whole thing. Because of it's so strange. They're in this giant studio, but they only use a very small part. They're literally kind of set up in the middle of this giant sound stage, and they're only using a very small part, and it makes them look very isolated in like the wide shots, because there's no one standing around, because it's such a big studio that they're in, and they're just using a very small part of it.
Yeah, very oddly lit as well with the color, and there's it was dark.
I thought that felt a little bit 1960s-ish, with the color, multicolor in the background. So you could tell they had the lighting set up, and then the other two are more documentary feel. The first one felt very surreal because of that, and you're absolutely right, Eric. That's the lighting felt kind of strange.
You would think, because to your point, you would think that because it was the 60, it would be brighter. It would be like but it really captured I think the mood of what they were feeling, like it somehow, some way, it really captured the dourness of where they were. And yet everybody around them seemed to be like, especially Michael Lindsay Hogg, who was like really like, oh, I'm trying to make this ambitious thing. We're going to put you back on TV. We're going to do this and that kind of thing. And it's like, and they were in their own place and they were just kind of like, yeah, well, you know, whatever. Yeah. There didn't seem to be any real direction.
Yeah, Paul
right?
was there, you know, working, right? You know, Paul was there, ready to go, and almost didn't seem like, I don't need the rest of you guys. I'll just do all my thing, you know? Mm-hmm. That annoyed George, you know, that annoyed everybody. I mean, they seemed like 4 people who were ready to go off on their own. And as the documentary progresses, you see them collaborating more. And once they got to Apple, that's where I thought you saw the fun. And it's not, I had heard so much that Let It Be was, you know, such a downer. It showed the band breaking up and everything. But those latter 2 episodes, I thought really showed the joy of them working together a little bit more once they were in that studio.
Yeah, I think there was a couple of things going on there in the beginning, right? Because they were coming off the White Album or the album known as the Beatles, which was their most fragmented piece of work. They were kind of all working kind of alone, working by themselves. So the idea was, let's kind of get back, let's work together, let's record stuff without overdub, stuff that we can perform live if we wanted to. And like Nick was saying, because you spend so much time and because there is so much footage, you do end up starting to understand the role of each one of these, of the Beatles. You kind of understand where they fit into the group at that time, what they cared about, what they didn't care about. And then, like Eric said, their manager, Brian Epstein, had died like a year or so before. So the Beatles were kind of left adrift. There was no one to say no to them. Likewise, there was no one to make a definitive decision, because when you watch this, they're getting assaulted by people left and right about all these ideas. We want to film in Tripoli. We want to get a boat. We want to if we film in Tripoli, we need people that speak English. So we got to get English people and put them on a boat. And Paul's like, yeah, let's do it. John's like, whatever. Ringo's like, sure. And George is like, this is an absolute waste of money. This is insanity. This is madness. So you start to see, like, a manager would be the buffer in between that would get all those ideas, then present them to a group, let them bicker it out, and then filter it back up. But those scenes in Twickenham where they're literally standing around and just kind of getting assaulted with ideas,
people,
and they just want to make music. They're like, we just want, like, they basically like, we can't talk about this, and they kind of walk back and just start making music again, because that's not their job. They're not managers; they're musicians.
You
felt that. I'm sorry, Nick. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, there's that scene where they bring them the catalog of what they, you know, the new catalog that they purchased.
Stuff to buy, music
business.
To buy.
I mean, I really think
Sears catalog.
This whole documentary really made me think that it was business that broke up the Beatles rather than everything else.
Absolutely.
Like, I think they were all going in such, you know, Ringo was doing the movie, and it just felt like, I think, and I had read that starting that Apple business, I think, also dragged them out, and then, you know, later on, all the litigation that they went through. I mean, it's really business minded. These are artists, and suddenly they're thinking about business, and they don't have a manager, like you said.
They were kind of forced into that, though, weren't they? Yeah, because when Brian Epstein was alive, and you really felt the absence of him, because I think Paul ultimately was probably trying to be the adult in the room. Somebody had to step up and say, we need to do this ourselves now. We don't have Mr. Epstein, as he called him, which I thought was interesting.
They all referred to him that way.
There was that love and respect for the man that they had. And, this guy did everything for them. They weren't used to doing all this kind of stuff. And now all of a sudden they're thrust into this position of making these kinds of decisions. And it just seemed like they just, at this point, they didn't either didn't care, or, Paul felt like it needed to be done, but he was ready to go to do whatever, just to keep the band alive and to keep whatever, the name going, as it were. But I don't know. The rest of the band just kind of fell off, Ringo the whole time. He's like, it looks like he's like sleeping, or like he's you don't hear him
observing.
Say,
he's like observing it all, and like you said, without somebody to say no, you can also indulge in bad decisions too. You can get people, and that's where I think what Michael Lindsay Hogg was really pushing them towards. We got to do something big. We got to do something explosive. We have to do something grand. And George Harrison is like, well, can't we do a concert and then go away somewhere grand? Like he didn't want the two. He didn't want the two combined. He's like, let's just do this performance, whatever it is, and then go away. Like, he absolutely was at this point. You can tell he was checked out.
Yeah,
he was checked out. He was at that breaking point, and they do talk about it during that hidden microphone scene when George, he reaches his breaking point. There's some amazing stuff that happens before that, though, and I want to talk about it. They basically start rehearsing. They need to get songs together. They don't really have anything, so we get to see the process. Right, this is the magic of what this is about: is seeing a song title or seeing a few chords in the very beginning and humming nonsense lines.
Mm-hmm.
And we get to see, and we hear a lot of songs over and over, but you get to really see it from its infancy to its full development at the end. And that's where the Beatles magic was, not in business decisions and getting that stuff figured out. That kind of is the distraction. But when you can get them there and talking and there was still some frustrations and you see that tension mainly between Paul and George. It seems just like, Paul, like Eric said, Paul was trying to assert some type of control and just scheduling. And we can't just kind of come in and just hang out.
He pretty much said as much. Like he said, he goes, I've been sort of the leader of this band for the last year and a half. He made that kind of comment.
And I don't want to be. He's like,
and he really didn't. No, he didn't want to say no. He didn't want to, the whole thing about Yoko, of course, obviously we'll get to that, but it's like, everybody was expecting to see more of, I guess, of her, like, oh, she broke up the Beatles, and she didn't do anything. She was just sitting there, the whole time. But Paul was like, I'm not going to be the one to say we can't bring our girlfriends here, because he brought Linda in. Patty Boyd showed up at one point,
and Maureen,
all the
Starr showed up too.
Right. So Paul is most definitely thrust into that position because because everybody else just seemed to like drift off. So he just took on that responsibility, which you got to give him credit for.
It's kind of like John Lennon was there, but his thing was like, let's just do the work. Like he was kind of there to play music. Like you get this sense from John Lennon that he wants to have a good time, but takes the work seriously. So when he's working on when he's working on Paul's songs or anybody else's songs, he's equally invested. Like I never got the impression that John was like, kind of off-putting or off-put by stuff. He showed up every day and was kind of there to do the work and have fun doing it. Paul had to be like the taskmaster and like the warden and the bad guy.
Yeah.
And Ringo was just there to support. Like he's just like, I think he understood his role is I'm here to support everything that's going on and not really get in the way of it. And then George was just growing, like the resentment was just kind of growing and festering. And he mentioned it a few times in wanting more, and the whole one track per album thing just isn't working for him, and he wasn't understanding. He wasn't understanding what Paul wanted
too. Like he was like the criticism was getting to him, I think, right? Because there's a couple of times he's like, just get Eric Clapton, right? Just get somebody else. If they can do it better, then just get somebody else, right?
Right.
And I think because you could see when they talk about the night before, he was watching TV and that's when he had an idea for a song, right? And he's excited when he gets to play it, and then Paul kind of comes in and is like, do it this way,
No, you definitely got the sense every time they showed George come in with a song. I did this last night. Everybody looked bored. Nobody cared. At least the footage, it kind of conveys that. You see Paul at the piano, like he's looking at him like he's just bored to tears. People are reading newspapers at one point, but
I don't blame him. Yeah.
Those were the moments though for me that I was like sitting up on the couch, like these beautiful songs, just one of his songs. And as prolific as Paul McCartney is, I would take that one song by George Harrison over 5 bad Paul McCartney songs because he's so prolific.
I felt like Ringo at one point when he was like, I could listen to Paul playing at the piano all day, right? Because it was just like, this felt like he was at his peak of creativity,
Yeah.
And he said at one point, like, he hasn't been writing with John. He said, I don't know if he said years or whatever, but they haven't, when they were living together, they were able to write those beautiful songs, and now it's Paul. It's Paul writing these, and he's really just
he just kept working.
Yeah, like when he was just strumming that guitar, and you could see the song develop right before our eyes.
That's right.
And then George jumps in, and Ringo, and I don't think John Lennon wasn't there yet, right?
Yeah, he was
but
late.
the song got developed.
Starts
Right
developing.
there
Yeah,
before
amazing.
our eyes. I mean, it was gold.
The spine tingling, the first spine tingling moment for me is hearing the Beatles perform All Things Must Pass.
Yeah.
Like, you know what that song is going to become, and there he's presenting it, and it's kind of like they're kind of doing it. And I was like, you don't connect it. You connect solo stuff with solo stuff, and you don't connect that this song could have been a Beatles song,
Mm-hmm.
and they're actually performing it. And I'm like, wow. I was like, this would have been a knockout for the Beatles. Like, it would have been a home run. It would have been like another While My Guitar Gently Weeps. And I got chills when that part came out. I'm like, wow, like so many like missed opportunities. And it's funny because there are other instances within this when songs that are being worked on here end up being solo songs. Like Paul McCartney works on Another Day.
Another Day, yep.
Which is one of his solo songs. And then John Lennon, a couple of times it pops up called
Trip to Marrakesh.
Trip to Marrakesh, which would become Jealous Guy.
Yeah.
It totally becomes a different song, but that the melody is there and everything is there. And I'm listening to him I'm like, that's a different song. I'm like, that is a John Lennon solo song. So it's pretty amazing that they're bringing ideas and maybe they don't flesh them out and they put it away and you work on something else. And then they end up being solo work. They end up like Jealous Guy didn't come out for years later, so it's just all this stuff is just kind of, I don't know. It must be amazing to be that prolific where this stuff just kind of rolls out. And you see, like Nick said, with McCartney, he's playing chords on his bass, literally figuring this out, humming gibberish. And it's like, okay, here it is.
And there it is. The groundwork is laid. Yeah.
Even Ringo playing his Octopus's Garden, right? And then George comes in and he's like, well, he starts playing on the keys and it gets better.
Try this and try that.
You see their collaboration, which is what, as a Beatles fan, it's like, you wish they could have just kept going.
Yeah.
But they were pulled in so many different directions.
So interesting to see them all being able, they all know how to play piano. I've never seen Ringo play piano. Yeah. He was at the piano. George comes over, he's playing. I'm like, wow, this is,
they all just jump
guys,
on.
These guys are, so to say that they don't have any talent, like some people say, they're not great musicians, that's BS.
No, and the neat thing is when Paul would play piano and John would play bass, he would play the bass with his guitar. He didn't play a bass guitar. He would play the bass notes with his Fender or his Epiphone, whatever he was playing. And I thought that was pretty neat too. I'm like, I'm hearing bass notes, but I'm not seeing a bass guitar. And then I'm looking, John Lennon is like playing the bass lines, but he's playing it with the guitar. So these guys are just, you're not going to get it. It just cemented how great these guys were. It's just that personalities and circumstances start getting in the way and eating at it. And that's what leads up to George Harrison leaving. And they and McCartney and Lennon acknowledged it as much in that secret recording. They're like, this is a wound that we let fester and we didn't do anything about it. And he goes, and today he needed, it festered further. And John Lennon said, we didn't give him a bandage.
Yeah, he was looking for support, and nobody gave it.
And we didn't give him any. Like, they both accepted responsibility. Like, this was on both of us that this has been going on. Which you don't hear that kind of candidness.
No, you don't, and like especially in Paul McCartney's case, because he accepts the responsibility. The fact that I have an ego, we both have egos. To hear him say that, never in a million years would I ever expect him to say something like that, because he's just not that. He's not that humble. Paul McCartney, he is very, he's got that arrogance. He's got that.
He's got the leader mentality because someone had to.
Right.
It was thrust upon him. So it's like, okay, I'm going to assume this mantle for better or for worse.
Yeah.
So George Harrison, you get the kind of the roll up to it, and it's not that dramatic. He literally just kind of gets up and says, "Okay, I'm out of here."
Well,
it wasn't a big proclamation. It was just kind of like
they foreshadowed it a little bit, and that was the one point where I wondered if that was legitimately in real time or if they took footage of him just looking dour as they're playing the song, because it was right before he's like, "Okay, I'm done with the band. I'm out of here. I'm out. Goodbye." But before that, they show close-ups of his face, and he just looks like just miserable. And it was after Paul had criticized him again,
Yeah.
There's probably a lot more footage. There's probably more stuff that went on that we didn't see.
He just came in. Yeah, he was just not happy from the jump. So then, a little bit of levity. What are we going to do about George? And John Lennon's like, split the instruments. Split the, very blasé. But then also he said, which is very interesting, he kept on coming up. We'll get Eric Clapton.
That came up multiple times.
Like Nick said, Clapton was mentioned earlier, where George Harrison said, "Oh, Clapton could play this," and John Lennon said, "We don't want Clapton, we want George Harrison."
Yep.
Like,
right. You're the guitarist
Harrison
for
was
this
doubting
band.
and George Harrison was having those doubts about what his ability was. He's like, I'm getting better. I'm not great at soloing, or I'm learning, and he was having that self-doubt, which probably didn't help when you're up against a formidable duo of Lennon and McCartney, right?
That's right.
And George Martin said that as much after he left. It's like, even though Lennon and McCartney aren't writing together, they're still a team. They're still Lennon and McCartney on the publishing, and then it's George Harrison. So that, that's a cross to bear, where you're just trying to be heard and not. It started out all for one and one for all, but then those two just kind of rose to the top. Someone had to.
Back then, George Harrison didn't have the confidence, and he didn't have the songwriting skills either. I mean, he grew into that.
He was getting there. He was absolutely developing on his own. He didn't have that, because if you watch a lot of that footage too, when McCartney is working up his songs, he's talking to John Lennon and looking at John Lennon like for the communication, for the collaboration. He very rarely looks over at George Harrison.
Right.
It's always been those two, like, locked in and bouncing off of each other. So Harrison leaves, and it gets pretty awkward, and it gets weird because they didn't know really what to. It seemed so offhanded, like, "Oh, I'm leaving." Like, it wasn't a big blowout, so it's kind of like, okay, he left. What do we do? And then it just kind of ended up sitting around, and then John Lennon leaves for the day. He kind of leaves, and then just like Paul McCartney and Ringo are just like sitting there, like.
Yeah, they come in the next day, and it's like, and that was the end of part one, right? And then part two starts, and they come in. John Lennon's not there yet; he's late.
What's happening?
Is he even coming at this point? Right? They didn't even know. And then there's that great moment where Paul says, "And then there were two."
Yeah,
and there's the camera stays on his face, and he's actually tearing up.
Yeah, it looks like he's welling up. It's kind of like, this is like
it felt like they thought the band was done. And that was it.
Yeah.
There's you're not just going to get a substitute or somebody else as a replacement. It's over. And I think
because Michael Lindsay Hogg is like, "Oh, can we just say he was sick?" He was still thinking about the show. The director, he's like, "Well, can we just say he's sick? He's not feeling well, and go on without him?" Because he's got a job to do, and it may sound mercenary, or it may just sound like insensitive, but this guy's trying to make a film as well, and he's got commitments and people that he's got to kind of answer to.
And everything's falling apart right before his eyes. He doesn't know what this is going to be.
In a week, it felt, this whole thing just became shambles.
Yeah.
So they basically are going to go to the three Beatles go to George Harrison's house. They're like, let's go talk to him.
It was actually Ringo's house. Like, they got to go to Ringo's house.
And let's talk to him. And that didn't end well. That was didn't have a desired result.
That's how Peter Jackson. It's a little bit of silent filmmaking, right? You got the titles coming up. Right, where
it did not go well, or something like that, or
go well. Right? That felt dramatic, right? And then you hear them then talking about it afterwards, and they said the same thing. Like, it didn't go well. But the interesting thing I thought was what they said about. They said Yoko did a lot of the talking for John. John didn't talk. So I wonder how much of that was also embellishment or just in hindsight. But because you don't really see any negativity from the relationship of John and which is the big thing about this, is what broke up the band. I did feel like she was sitting in his lap and hanging out there, and some of the other spouses and significant others were there, but they weren't like there while they were working.
They weren't. Yeah, they're just off to the side, just kind of doing their thing. And that's funny.
And that was as presumptuous.
Yeah, I would have given anything to be a fly on the wall, in there.
Right.
McCartney made that prophetic statement, right? During that time, he said, "Oh, in 50 years, people are going to say we broke up because Yoko sat on an amp." And how right he was, because it was revisionist history. Because and it goes to one of the other scenes in the documentary when they were talking after. We'll get to it. Actually, let's the first meeting with George Harrison didn't go well. They're trying to figure out what they're going to do. They actually end up deciding, this Twickenham studio isn't working for us. This is could be part of the problem as well. We need to get in a place where we're comfortable. So they kind of decide, okay, let's go to Apple Core, which is their business that they just started, which is movie production, electronics, all these great different things they're going to do, all these magical things. They're like, let's get into the basement of Apple. We'll set up a studio there, and we'll go with it. They take another crack at George Harrison, and he relents. He says, "Okay, I'll come back." But there had to be some concessions. They mention it in the film, but they didn't mention what they were. But there was some things that had to change that to get him back, because he was absolutely done. He's like, I'll see you guys, see you in the clubs, and take care. And he was absolutely done. So we don't know what the maneuvering was or what the wrangling was to get him back. But when he came back, he was a bit different. He wasn't as negative, because he was negative. Right. Because he was just in a bad mood. I mean, he just wasn't feeling it. So not that he was, he's not generally Mr. Sunshine, George Harrison. He definitely has the more cynical edge. He's definitely the more realist. Like, how much is this going to cost? Mm-hmm. Who's going to pay for it? Like, and John's like, who cares? Like, when they were talking about like getting a ship, and John's like, someone will pay for it for us. Who do you care? Like, but and George Harrison like, but this is absolutely insane. Like, he still has that that sensibility about him, that no matter how much money is being spent or whatever, it's some things are just dumb ideas no matter what.
It was like, that was the start of his, his material things just became less and less important. Right. Yeah. And I mean, his spirituality starting to show there, like, none of this stuff matters. It's like, so, so, but it was like night and day when he came back, and then those sessions started where they're in the basement of Apple. It literally, like the bright lit room, it literally was like a totally different atmosphere and feel. And you could see things like when George Harrison is playing, when he's performing that Bob Dylan song, you see John Lennon like just looking at it, just staring at him, like really like intensely, like, this guy's got it, man. He's there, like that's when you started to notice, they started to notice him, or at least that's what the footage kind of leads you to think. But, and Paul himself is just, they're starting to take notes. Maybe that was part of the discussion.
Yeah.
Is that, I'm coming back, but you guys need to
give me more of a say.
Yeah. Give a crap, of what I'm doing, like,
It was definitely a changed tone when they went to Apple. It just was like night and day, like you said.
Yeah.
At first they were aghast. It said George was like, "Oh my gosh, this is because they weren't prepared. They weren't prepared to suddenly go there and start doing that. They seemed happier. They seemed playing together, instead of just, off on their. It just worked better. Even Paul seemed less of like, I'm controlling everything. So maybe it all stemmed from that conversation, that second one. Whatever was said in that room made it work and made them say, let's get this project going.
Yeah, because during all this time too, the conversations about what this end result is going to be keep changing too. First it was like, in Libya or Tripoli in this big stone coliseum. Then it's like on a boat, and we'll boat people out. And then it's like, well, let's just do it here.
They were going to go into Parliament first. That was one idea. Let's do this in Parliament.
Let's do it in Parliament. Let's do it somewhere where we're going to get arrested. Like this thing, like. Then we're going to do it in a studio like one of their old television specials. So this idea, first of all, had no concrete ending. All they knew is they had to be ready in a few weeks with a certain amount of songs to do something. Like at this point, they don't know what they're doing because they're changing their mind. The director is kind of like, well, okay, what can we do? Or what do you want to do? Or here's some other options. And they're just not really interested in it. It seems like they said yes and they thought, oh, this might be a good idea. But and Paul McCartney said it early on. He goes, "Well, we're kind of nervous. I'm kind of nervous about playing live."
But that was the glue that kept them going, though, because they had something to do. They had some kind of a commitment to this thing, no matter what it was. They didn't know what it was, but it's like, we're here, we're doing this. We got only so many days to do it in. Let's knock it out, and that just shows. That there's still something left, right? They needed some kind of direction. They needed some kind of thing to bring them together and say,
some inspiration.
We need something to do here, and we're going to do it. You tell us what to do, we'll do it. We're here, we're committed to it. So,
noticeably absent from this documentary is George Martin. He's the Beatles producer, but for all intents and purposes, this album. Which led to him having some sour grapes. He really had nothing to do with because they were just. This ended up not being an album at all. I mean, this ended up not being. Let's be honest. This ended up not being released until after they broke up. So everything, all this stuff that they did, they shelved and went to work on Abbey Road. Who you do see is Glyn Johns, who was
pretty much
was the engineer for this project. He ended up being a big time producer for the Eagles. He went on to all these other projects, but he kind of figures heavy into this whole thing because he's the guy kind of in the control room and trying to get things figured out and trying to get consoles installed and trying to get everything going. And George Martin, you really only see in a very limited role, and you don't really even hear much from him.
I was wondering why he was even there, because I knew at this point they weren't even working with him anymore, right? Yeah. I mean, they just went off and did their own thing.
Well, he was there. He was the producer, but
well, that's what they did. Like, what was his role? I didn't really get that he was. I mean, Glyn Johns seemed to be more in charge, though. Like he was just kind of there as an advisor. Yeah.
That's what happened. Is all this stuff just was rehearsal footage. Phil Spector ended up turning this into the Let It Be album. But all this stuff was never like mastered that way. It was kind of, they just were recording all this stuff, recording rehearsals, right? There's one point where I think Glyn is like, hey, do you want me to record this? Because tape costs a lot of money.
Do you want me to go over the other?
Yeah. Like, do you want to erase, like he literally said that, like, I think, do you want to erase over this or should I stop? Because this isn't the age of digital where you could just record forever. Yeah. Like you can't just record rehearsals. You have to have something to perform and record. So George Martin was kind of like the man in waiting, literally waiting for them to be ready to record. The film, all this is recording the rehearsals to get ready to record. And they never ended up actually recording an album. This was made into one much later. So when they're doing these arrangements, I think it's in Twickenham, Paul McCartney is on the piano and they're talking about, well, we need piano, but we need the guitars as well.
Yeah. How do you do that live?
How do we do this? Who's going to, then we'll be down a guitar player and how do we do this? And what do we do? So there's some seeds laid there for a problem that they didn't realize a solution would present itself very soon in the form of Billy Preston, who was a jazz player. He played for Ray Charles' band. He just happened to be in town. And George Harrison, I think, kind of knew who he was, but he had they had toured with them like in the early days. I think in the early 60s, I think the Beatles had maybe played with them. So they kind of knew him from there. Billy Preston's in town. They're like, hey, let's just invite him in. And you see another change. I think Billy Preston also changed the whole dynamic of what was going on in there because you brought somebody in who was excited to be there. He's like, I'm with the Beatles. Like, what do you need me to do? And they start saying like, oh, do we pay this guy? Do we pay him?
I love that.
Or because he just kind of keeps showing, like we keep inviting him back. What do we do about Billy Preston? Because he keeps coming in and he's happy to be here, but we're recording stuff. So do we pay him or what do we do about it? It was kind of a funny thing because they were so excited. But
there was talk, right? Whether it was George or somebody about keep bringing people in. And I could almost see the wheels turning in his head about what would future be like, creating this super group, just like, because he's like, bring them all in, why not? Make them all part of the Beatles.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think when you hear the rehearsal for the song Get Back and you hear Billy Preston play the electric piano for the first time, you feel something is happening. Now there's some progress being made because there was a missing piece that the Beatles thought they knew what they needed and then figured out it was what they needed. And he came in I think he also solidified everything that was going on with his professionalism because he's literally playing whatever. Like it seems like he could play whatever they wanted. He was able to play it as far as like chords, notes, arrangements, whatever. He's just like, he's there. He's ready to jam.
It's so interesting, because they all kind of lit up when he walked into the room, right? They're like, "Oh, Billy," and they're like, "Hey, what's going on?" Yeah. So there was that. That's all they needed was to have someone come in though and feed that energy, feed that ego,
be the spark,
exactly, and to get them. Okay, now we're here. And I don't think Billy Preston would have cared if he had gotten paid or not. Obviously, I mean, he was just there. I mean, he had the time. He was, he had some other commitments, but he went off and did that. But he came back, and they just became literally almost part of the band, the fifth Beatle, as it were.
Beatle, yeah.
And you really get that sense when you see this footage because he's there. He's so much involved. He's not just a guest.
Yeah.
He is part of the process.
Day. Yeah. From then on, he's like there every day.
Yeah.
One observation I should have made earlier, but I don't think this documentary should have been called Get Back. It should have been called Fur Coats and Cigarettes, because everybody's wearing everybody wears a damn fur coat in this movie.
I mentioned
They're all wearing
how is nobody sneezing? How has nobody got allergies? I mean, all that smoke in the room.
But
yeah, you're right. These fur coats, like you just
they're
imagine
all wearing these fur coats, and they're all chain smoking. That's all they do is smoke.
Knowing what happens to George, later in life, right? He passed away from lung cancer, right? So I mean, it's just hits different people different ways, and it was and the fur coats. Everyone's got a fur coat on. I'm like, what is? It must have been the thing, but yeah. I mean, John mentioned a couple of times. He's like, "Oh, my voice was so much better yesterday." I was like, "You smoked a pack of cigarettes."
That's right.
Come on.
But they also had their tea. And their crumpets and whatever,
a lot of toasted marmalade,
honey.
Toasted marmalade, toasted butter. There's toast on the floor on a plate. Guys coming in. Who what do you want for lunch? Do you want some
mashed potatoes? I'll have some mashed potatoes.
Ringo wanted mashed potatoes.
Yeah, the second part was very much in the spirit of the old days. You kind of got the sense where you had all these people hanging around. And every scene there was somebody you do. Who's that? Like, who's that girl sitting there? Like, these people just sort of coming in and like just hanging out and just within the building and
that's
this was probably
right?
the most difficult episode though for me, because it's just the tediousness of them running through the same 4 songs.
Yeah.
And
just
then the
was
audio
very, very hard
at the very beginning, because again they weren't expected to be in there. So and I felt bad for Gwen, right? Because they're like, what's the matter? You can't record. And he's like, I'm still trying to get rid of that feedback that I'm hearing.
And he's saying, John, could you take the bass out of your guitar? Lower the bass. And John's like, what? What are you talking with the cigarette hanging out of his mouth? And
George Harrison ends up lending his recording console. They end up stitching 2 4-tracks together to make an 8-track. Because the basement of Apple was not a studio, but it became one. It became a rehearsal space, and they're like, okay, it is definitely more intimate. They're sitting on the floor, they're close together. It does have, and like I said, the white walls. It just had a brighter, more and they felt more comfortable, I guess. Also, the conversations about what to do about the concert continue. There's a mention, hey, why don't we just go on the roof and play? So there is a scene when Paul McCartney, like, they pushing him, hoisting him up on the roof, and he's like, I don't think so. Like, I'm not too sure. And George is like, I don't want to play he didn't want to play anywhere. I don't want to play on the roof.
The rickety nature of that wood. They're stepping on the wood. The wood's planks, like buckling underneath them. Like, what?
And they even support us.
Well, they said it in the title card. It's like all the equipment they were fearing that it was going to just go right through, and like all that. God,
absolutely crazy. One really neat trick about this, about the filmmaking end of it, right? Because there was a deadline. They started on, like, I don't know, January 2nd of 1969. They only had a couple of weeks, so the time was marked by calendar days, and
I love that.
And Peter Jackson's in the way he did it, each day like would zoom in on a calendar day, and the day would start, and when it ends, there'd be an X put over the calendar, and it would move to the next day. So you got a feeling of time like marching on. And they're running out of time because they were supposed to meet this one deadline. They end up missing it, and they're like, okay, we need to extend it 2 weeks. So then the calendar, they write a new date on the calendar of like, okay, concert is going to be this date instead, because they needed extra time to continue. So, there is some tension building within it, just using that kind of like trick of the calendar and the days kind of marking on, and there's supposed to be an endpoint to it. So this wasn't ever something that was just going to go on indefinitely. Because originally there was supposed to be a concert somewhere, and then they kind of squashed that, and then now it's like, okay, we'll go up on the roof. Like, we'll go up on the roof, and we'll do the songs, and it'll be fun, it'll be interesting, and we'll kind of get it. At this point, it just seems like they wanted to get it out of the way. Honestly, it was just kind of like
Paul said, we need that end goal, something to go for. That and that was what was missing, right? And that's what they were all trying to figure out. And they didn't have much time, because then, Ringo was going to go do his movie, and that was it. Who knows when they would all get together again. And they never did get back together again, right? They never had that 4 together doing a performance again. That was that.
But you saw Paul's face light up, though, when they said, we'll perform the songs on the roof and we'll record him. He was like, oh, we're playing live again. That's all he needed to hear was like, yeah, like that smile. That's the way that episode ended, where he's just kind of sitting back. He's like, yeah, like, and he's like all excited. But that was great.
Yeah,
but,
and you got to the great. Some of the great scenes when they were in Apple is they'd record something and then they'd all go into the control room and listen to it.
Yeah.
So you got to kind of, so now everybody's in even closer quarters and almost sitting on each other's laps and just really close and kind of listening to what's coming through. No overdubs. That was the kind of the stated mission, was to not do overdubs, stuff that can be just done live as was. So you kind of get the feeling like, okay, this is starting to come together. It actually never did, but you got the feeling that, okay, Billy Preston now comes in. So there's a little spark of inspiration. And now we know we're going to perform on the roof. So now we've got an end goal. Like Nick said, it's like, we've got something in focus that we can work towards. And I think you just start to kind of get the feeling that, I think this is when you get the feeling that they're really starting to work together, because now there's that end thing is in sight. So it's like, now it's kind of like it's literally a race to the finish. It's like, how are we going to do this? How can we, because now you got to run all the cabling up to the roof. Like they just barely built the studio, and the studio wasn't working right. The control room wasn't working right. And now it's like, okay, we're gonna go onto the roof, and that pretty much brings you to like the third part, which most of it is the performance of them finally running through their numbers, like figuring out, okay, this is the songs we're gonna do, and here's what it's gonna be, and we'll get away with it for as long as we can. And they go up to the roof. The funniest thing about it, this seemed, if I didn't know better, I would have thought it was scripted. So they finally get to the roof. They start playing on the roof, and there's all, the racket is just coming off the roof. No one knows where it's coming from. People think, like, oh, the windows are open in the studio, stop playing the music. The cops are the most polite cops ever. The British police, they knock on the door politely, like, hey, can we come in? Sure. Mm-hmm. The secretary plays dumb the whole, like, I don't really know what's going on up there. Yeah. Like she stonewalls these cops and the cops are too polite to like, well, I don't want to have to arrest anybody, but if we need to. And she's like, well, I don't know what they're doing. I think they're making a film.
We got 30 complaints in the last hour.
I don't know where they are. Yeah, he's like, we've gotten 30 complaints in the past few minutes. And she just, it almost seemed like something from Help or one of their other movies where the secretary's just playing so dumb. Uh-huh. But I think they told her that. It's just like, just stonewall these guys. Just, if anybody comes.
They had the hidden camera there. They
put the camera in the office.
It was all part of this marketing thing. They were outside with the microphones interviewing the street, the folks in the street.
Yeah, everybody was in place.
It was all
do their
about,
thing.
This is it. Yeah. It wasn't even about doing a performance. It was almost like they were up there, recording it. They had whether it was going to be a film. They didn't know what they had. They didn't know if it was going to be a TV show, but it was part of what they were going to do. And that's,
and some of the reactions were fun. Like some people, oh yeah, that's the Beatles. And some guys like, oh, I'm trying to conduct business here. You're ruining my business. Like,
and then the camera,
you woke me up from my sleep.
The camera they set up across the street on the other building. I thought they at least asked the person for permission, but the owner of that building comes in.
He's like, you're on my building.
What's going on with that lot up there? Like,
Yeah, and the secretary's like, no, there's no one up there. And the guy's like, yeah, there's a guy with a camera on my building. She totally played it dumb as long as she could. Like, wait, I don't know.
And their manager, the Mal Evans, which we haven't mentioned yet, but he's there. He's kind of like in place, and he's there.
He's like their Man Friday. He writes lyrics for them. He gets them food. He does whatever needs to get done. He's kind of like their caretaker, Mal Evans.
So he was kind of they got through the secretary, but now he comes in and he's trying to stall them and stonewall them too. Like he's well, you're going to need to turn their amps off. Can you at least do that? Can keep it contained? And he's like, oh yeah, we'll do that. And they totally don't do that.
Yeah, because the two cops finally get on the roof, and Paul McCartney, they're playing and they're playing their songs, and McCartney looks back and sees the cops and kind of smiles, but they don't stop. And in the meanwhile, like the police sergeant comes in, right, knocks on the door, can I come in? There's a racket going on or something, and she goes, oh yeah, but you can't go on the roof, but you can go to the 4th floor. And he's like, oh, thank you very much, ma'am. You know, and he goes up like
Yeah, there's
it
like
just
too
seemed
many people on the roof. I don't know if
it seemed like a movie. It seemed it seemed scripted. It seemed so
it felt like Hard Day's Night.
Yeah.
Literally, it felt like you were
So
watching that kind of thing.
So he kind of goes up, and the cops are kind of standing there like, okay, what do we do now? Do we go and handcuff John Lennon? They get their numbers in. They do a couple of songs a few times. The great thing is during some of those performances, you'll see a little graphic. Hey, this was the take that ended up being used on the album. So you got to hear, oh, this was the actual one that they got, which was kind of neat. But then, it's time to shut it down. And that's when, like Eric said, Mal Evans actually does go and turn off John Lennon's amp. And John Lennon just turns around like, what's going on? Everybody else is still playing.
George turned it back on. George
walked over. And I was like, whoa, George Harrison. Yeah, he turned. It's like,
I loved it.
I was like,
we're not done yet.
Well, Paul, like when the cops first showed up, and he turns. He's like, woo! Like you can see, he's like, damn the man! Like this the first punk rock moment or something. Like this is like,
he had mentioned that early on. He said we should do something where we get arrested or trespass.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he kind of foreshadowed it. I don't think they thought it would be on the roof of their building,
right?
But and the cameras were everywhere. There was like 5 cameras on the roof, 1 on a building across the street, and then another 1 in the office, and then I think 4 on the street outside catching reactions from people. And like I said, those reactions varied from, oh my God, that's great, to most of them were, oh my God. Even there was one older guy like, oh yeah, I love what they're doing. I respect them. They're good boys. They're great lads. It was like, and that was like an older guy. And then
would you let your daughter go? Of course, they got money.
There you go.
He's not stupid. Hey, there you go.
So they finally, it all winds up. The concert ends, and that pretty much is where they leave it. Is kind of that's the document that Peter Jackson puts forward in this 8 hours. I mean, there's a lot that we didn't talk about because we can't talk about 8 hours worth of footage. This, like I said, this stuff would be shelved. They would go later in 69 and start recording Abbey Road, which would be their masterpiece.
Yeah. But
then they would break up.
I would contend, though, that it's because of this situation, because of this, whatever it was, this project. I don't think there would have been an Abbey Road.
Yeah.
Because at that point, when you think back to Twickenham, and they didn't know what was going, they weren't really into it. And it took all of this kind of thing to happen for them to get that creative spark back. To do one more album. And at least we got that out of it,
And they did ask George Martin. They said, "Will you produce us?" And George Martin says, "I will produce you if you let me produce you like we used to."
Yeah,
because everything got splintered with the White Album, and everyone was doing their own things. And then this turned out to be a debacle. Right, this stuff never got used until after they broke up. All these tapes were given to producer Phil Spector. He added strings, he added his wall of sound to it, and made it into something else. But that's a story for another time. Let's talk a little bit about, do you think, Nick and Eric, do you think this is revisionist history? Do you think that this is because I guarantee you most people probably haven't seen Let It Be. They've probably only read about how the film was, or do you think this puts to rest some of the rumors? Or do you think this is Peter Jackson's, just his version, and that maybe there was other footage of them fighting, but he just decided not to use it?
I guess you can't tell until you see what's left on the cutting room floor, and I don't know if we want to see another 9 hours, right? Or whatever it is. But the joy is there. I mean, seeing the creativity is there, and I'm not a Beatles expert. I'm a Beatles fan, but I had heard like one of the reasons they stopped touring and performing is they couldn't hear themselves play because there was all these like teeny boppers screaming at them, and that's all they could hear. So they became this studio band, this album band, and then they couldn't play because the stuff they were creating in the studio couldn't be performed live, right? You couldn't do it
too
live.
Elaborate.
So that's what made them want to come and just do this kind of live. But they still never performed in front of an audience, all 4 of them together, even on the rooftop, right? Because the audience that was down in the street level, they couldn't see them, they heard them. And even them playing up there, they had to like kind of peek over after they played to see the people that were down there.
So do you consider that a concert, Nick, or not? Does it count?
It's a performance, but it wasn't a concert. I mean, they were shooting, and they replayed their sets, to record it, So they didn't really just let's do like 8 songs straight or 12 songs straight, it wasn't really a concert. It was a publicity stunt, which is not because it worked. It
Mm-hmm.
it got them to do Abbey Road afterwards, right?
That's right.
So, but they never did that last. It would have been great if they did it in Libya, or they did it on a boat, or they did it with an audience, like right in front of them, to see how that would have worked out. And who knows if they would have loved it, and they would have maybe kept doing. Who knows what the future would have held?
Yeah.
But no, it's just a fascinating experiment, and they caught it all on film. I mean, that's what this is amazing that they were able to do that. But who knows what's left on the cutting room floor? Who knows? This is one version edited together. I would have loved to have seen his 2.5-hour theatrical release. You know, what would he have done, and how would he have? That might have been more interesting to me, because it definitely wouldn't have been this dark, gloomy, Let It Be version that everybody now talks about. That is so
that's
dark.
the thing. It's like, that's what I don't understand. I've never seen Let It Be myself, so I don't know what people are really referring to when they say that documentary was that much darker. I think he captured that, and to say that this was like a more positive version of that, they just focused on Twickenham, with Let It Be, and just focused on that, but this had to go there to get to this point where that exhilaration was back, just for the briefest of moments, and to, like I said, that was the creative spark they needed, because you see them starting to work up songs from Abbey Road, right? I mean,
Maxwell Silverhammer,
they're
Darling,
playing Octopus's Garden, something,
Yeah, I Want You.
they go from this to that, right like that. I mean, they're just, but to say that, I don't know, Peter Jackson, I mean, yeah, anybody could really edit things together to make it seem what you want it to be. And you can kind of force people to think this or that or whatever. I don't know. I think he said it was just, we tried to make it as honest as we could be, so I'll take his word for it in that sense, where it is, you're literally maybe less of a fly on the wall, but more like you're coming to the dinner table with your family. That's exactly, this is a direct quote from him. Like you're full on the, right and center in the room. He puts you in that experience of them having to go through these songs in such a tedious manner, staving off the boredom of having to do these songs 10 times in a row. Like, we actually experienced that, and it was difficult. It was difficult to watch, really.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, oh my God,
there's a reason you don't bring an audience to a rehearsal, right? I mean,
but when it's all said and done, when after seeing it, now we're talking about it, and it seems like a blur now.
Yeah,
it's like, wow, now, but we got that experience, and I really appreciated that. That we got to see this great footage, which would have been on a shelf, 50 years on, and the fact that we got to see this much of it, God, I mean, you just imagine what's left, like you said, Nick. So
a couple of points. George Harrison made a very interesting statement in part 3, I think it was, because he goes, I have so many songs. He goes, why don't I just, he floated the idea of solo albums. He goes, why don't I just, let me make an album so I can get this stuff out, and then we can kind of preserve what the Beatles are. Right. Yeah. He actually says that to John Lennon. It's just him and them talking. He's like, I have all this music, why can't we just do our own projects and then still be the Beatles? So someone had floated, and I don't know if John Lennon ever thought of that idea, or that solo albums were a thing, right? Back then you were in a group, and that was it. You were in a group.
Yeah.
And you didn't do something else and then come back. So, a novel idea. Flash forward to now, Peter Jackson was telling the story about how he looked at all the footage, and he had a bunch of it on an iPad, and he went to go see Paul McCartney. And he said, Paul, he goes, I saw all the footage. And he said that Paul McCartney's face dropped, because Let It Be has been the document in everybody's minds of how things were. And Paul McCartney was afraid of, because I guess when that's all you see, that's all you remember.
Yeah.
And Peter Jackson said, no, it's good. and that's what, and Paul McCartney kind of uplifted his spirits, because that Let It Be that movie has been such an albatross about a documentation of a group splitting up, and warts and all. And that was like Michael Lindsay Hoggs, like that was his angle, right? Because that's what he was seeing at the time, is turmoil and not getting along, and that was his perspective of it, and that's what the documentation was. And when Peter Jackson came to him and said, yeah, no, it's good. It's good. It wasn't as bad as Let It Be or the things you remember about that with the rumors and Yoko broke us up and this, that, and the other thing. And they also mentioned in the documentary, they mentioned Alan Klein. John Lennon mentions Alan Klein towards the end. He goes, I'm going to meet with Alan Klein. You should go meet him. He was the manager for the Rolling Stones. And he's just known as like allegedly the biggest dirtbag. Really just not a great guy. That was one of the wedges that broke the Beatles up because Paul McCartney knew, he goes, we should not be having anything to do with this guy. He was actually like, let Linda's parents, the Eastmans, let them manage us, because they've got, because they were from Eastman Kodak. That's where Linda Eastman is from. So that was a rift there because John Lennon ended up going with Alan Klein and then ended up severing ties later on. But there were some rifts there that were irreparable. But I think for what we're talking about for this piece of time, yeah, you can see that you can have those rifts, but that doesn't mean that's all encapsulating of what your relationship is, right? Everybody's got rifts where they're grumpy, and Ringo said it. We've been grumpy for a year. We've been grumpy for 18 months.
Yeah. Even the riffs that the riffs that they had though was never a real heated exchange. You didn't see them like cursing at each other, or
I think because they were tired.
They were so polite about it, right? They were like, very quiet, very sort of, but they were frustrated. There was I think it was more of a frustration than it was an out and out like fight or argument. Maybe there were. Maybe we don't see that. I don't know. Is that on film? Who knows? I don't, but
so Nick, would a casual Beatles fan or a casual music fan, is this something they would be interested in?
I think
because Peter Jackson has said, I saw an interview. He goes, there is no 2.5 hour cut. There will never, I can't do it. He goes, I cannot do it.
I don't think an average moviegoer could sit through it. To me, it's like me recognizing the tunes. To me, it's me seeing them. Okay, this is the early stage of this, or this is going to become this, and seeing the process. My kids were sitting there, and they're like, "This is the Beatles," because you just hear them. Even when they sing the songs, it's like John is hamming it up and doing it in a weird voice. And to me, I find that endearing because I remember how he acted in,
that's right.
The movies and the interviews and all that stuff, and that's what made them so popular with pop culture. But I mean, maybe little snippets here and there, but I think a little overindulgent, a little too much. But as a Beatles fan, you're sitting in the room with them while they're rehearsing and making this happen, and you never saw this footage before. You never saw these conversations before. It's like you're in the room with them, and it's like I was captivated. I sat through all 8 hours and never felt like I got to turn this off and walk away. I was captivated,
I think that's the blessing and the curse. Is it might be a little bit more difficult to be accessible for the casual listener or the casual Beatles fan, so they're going to miss out on something really special. I would advocate for a shorter version just so you can kind of give people the Reader's Digest version, and then if they want more, here's the full 8 hours. Peter Jackson did it the opposite. Normally he puts out his film and then has expanded editions. This is the expanded edition with no theatrical cut, and he basically said, I couldn't do it. Couldn't do 2.5 hours.
I feel bad for the person who won't sit through it and miss out on those golden little nuggets that are interspersed throughout. Because it's gold. It's like you're literally seeing genius create music and just collaboration, how that works versus solo. There's that dramatic arc. If you know the history of the Beatles, you're seeing those moments, and it's gold.
But there are a lot of Beatles fans though who love the music, but they're not particularly interested in the process of making music, right? And that's what I had to explain to, like, we sat down and started watching part 1, and I knew I'm not going to be able to watch this with anyone. I have to watch this by myself because I can't be distracted. I can't,
have questions or.
So of course my mom and my sister come into the room, and my wife, and they're like, "Oh, let's watch." I was like, I don't think you guys are going to really be into this because I knew exactly what it was going to be, or had a good idea of what it was going to be. And they were kind of like, "Oh, we like the Beatles." So we sat down, and like 15 minutes in,
people start dropping out.
Happening. They were going over the songs already, and it's just like, what is this? Like, I'm like, I had to turn it off and return to it later.
To be continued.
Yeah.
So that I could
Not for
finish
everybody.
watching it. So
Yeah, I don't think this is a party watch. I don't think you're gonna get a bunch of people around with popcorn and say, "Hey, let's watch it or let's binge it." I think Eric, you hit the nail right on the head. I think it's an intimate experience, right? And like Nick said, you're kind of in the room with them. And I think if you're watching it by yourself, you can filter out all the external things and get into it. And yeah, it's very talky, and they're reading articles about themselves and goofing on it. And so a lot of it is extraneous stuff, right? If this was a film, you'd be like, this absolutely does not need to be in it, has nothing to do with it. But what it does in the end is create that atmosphere that you're hanging out with them. You're seeing them eat the toast. You're seeing them smoke the cigarettes. You're seeing them read the newspaper, all these normal things that regular people do. You're kind of in the room. And I think, you hit the nail on the head there, Eric, where it probably is something better to watch by yourself, so you can kind of envelop yourself in the atmosphere.
But I have to tell you, it was challenging. It requires a commitment from you.
8 hours.
You are. And I was up for the challenge, but I have to say there were moments where I was kind of like wanting to fast forward it a little bit, just because they they kept. What got me was like what threw me was like they were coming in with all these other songs, and we didn't get to hear those other songs half as much as we did Get Back and Don't Let Me Down. It's like the same 4 songs like 10 times in a row, and it's like, okay, so and that ultimately became what the show was. So everything led up to that moment where this was it.
Yeah, they built
this is all they performed. These are the songs these are the only songs that they did.
I think what you're saying is they may have worked backwards from the rooftop concert and said, well, this is what was captured on the rooftop concert, so let's put the focus on the genesis and the creation of those songs. And you get a little bit of Maxwell Silverhammer, you get Oh Darling in a couple of different iterations in its evolution, but in the end, they want to, I think, see how Get Back started and then how it ended. How Don't Let Me Down started and how it ended.
It would have been interesting.
I think they may have worked backwards from the rooftop.
It would have been interesting to have him edited as such, to actually start the film with a snippet of the rooftop, and then go back.
Like do a non-linear way of doing it.
They had this whole list of songs, and they didn't run through the whole list. They just did those songs, which was interesting.
You need Tarantino for that, Eric. He'll start it in 1962 and then he'll go to 69 and then end in 66. That's how Tarantino would.
But I'll tell you, I enjoyed this more than I did the anthology release. All those. Because those were like, there was a reason some of them didn't make it into the albums and things like that, and some of those second takes, and it was interesting to hear. But if you're not a diehard Beatles fan, you don't. So it was interesting. But this, like I said, it's a process, and it was like they're there. So I appreciate it, but I'd love to see a 2.5 hour cut of this. I would,
Yeah. I'm sure there's going to be some fan that's going to do it. I think what makes it appealing too as a watch is that the footage is so crisp and so beautiful. So it's not like this crackly and it's got the little specks on it and everything. This absolutely looks gorgeous. So it's very easy to sit there and kind of be involved with it, because you're seeing like John Lennon, like crisp and clear and in ways you've never seen him before, especially John Lennon, because we've seen all the other Beatles, have had longer lives. So, it's really special to see kind of John Lennon. And I think I don't think he's in it as like he's in it, but like Nick says, he does a lot of goofing and a lot of mugging. And I think it was some of his own kind of, coping mechanisms with that kind of
when
stuff.
When he knows the camera's on, right?
Yeah, and singing weirdly and all that kind of stuff. But the footage just looks so gorgeous that you want to watch it, because it's like, oh, it just looks.
That's
like,
right.
You feel it like it's a document of 1969, and footage doesn't look that good from that era. It's usually kind of worn down and doesn't look good.
It really is like going back in time and seeing it
pops off the screen.
Yep.
Technologically, it's a work of art. And the technology that was employed for this thing, it's a masterpiece in that sense. If you're looking at it strictly from that technical standpoint, and the audio as well, and having to use the audio, but like having to insert footage where it's not, you could see that it's not what they're saying.
Yeah.
to go to kind of
But they're
match
trying to
up
get
with
the
the
point
audio.
across.
But trying to match that up had to have been very difficult to do as well. So you got, kudos to that.
I wonder if he took any footage home. It's like, I'm just going to take this and have my, this. I'll keep this one for a rainy day. But
here's a question. I mean,
Sure.
would you watch this again?
I actually watched part 1 again today.
Okay.
But I had it on in the background while I was doing other work. I could see myself revisiting it at some point.
Mhm.
I don't see this as, I'm going to watch this over and over, because it's just not that. It's more, I think it's something you watch, you leave it, and you revisit it in a year or so, when it's kind of like you can't go through the 8 hours again, because there's a lot in there, but there's so much that you have to get through to get those nuggets. So I think it's one of those things of like next year's like, you know what, let me watch Get Back again. Let me kind of sit and kind of and revisit it. But I don't think it's going to be like, I watched it 3 times this year or something.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah.
But I
Same
think
with me.
out of all 3 of them, I think part 1 is something that maybe people can sit through. It's a little darker than the other 2, but it has an arc. It has a storytelling arc, and then there's that scene where he just comes up with that song. I mean, that alone, if anybody's hesitant about watching anything, just watch that scene of just seeing him come up, just sitting there strumming. This is a tune that's been in my head, and just the song develops, and then you see George and Ringo coming in too, and it's like, how often are you going to see brilliant people create
just like that
popular song right there? Like, you're seeing that song born right there on camera. I mean,
it makes you realize how absolutely worthless your life is when you see Paul McCartney write a song right in front of you.
Right.
Literally, he writes one of the biggest hits of their time, and he just kind of and then the next time he's singing lyrics. It's like, okay, I'll go back.
There's
that
to great scene where all the technicians and all the other people kind of come in and grab the instruments and start playing. They're watching the Beatles.
After the Beatles left, we're going to use we're going to play. Yeah,
that's right.
The Beatles left, so I'm going to play Ringo's drums.
Isn't that everybody's dream?
This was not unlike the experience I had when I listened to Pet Sounds for the first time, the box set,
the Sessions
box set. This was that kind of experience for me, because wouldn't it be nice, like, 8 times in a row, like listening to the song and the breakup and breaking it down and really, sort of analyzing it. It was like, I kind of look at it like that. And I'm really grateful for this discussion, because I'm already starting to really appreciate this doc even more.
I think musicians will really dig this, because they're going to get a workshop of songwriting, of music, of construction, of Beatles. You get from this, I absolutely get that pretty much all the Beatles wrote music first, because John Lennon basically said that when George Harrison is working on some of the lyrics for something, John Lennon's just like, sing whatever, sing cauliflower until you get it. He goes, just put words in, and that gives you a glimpse into how people would put so much emphasis on, John Lennon, you wrote this and it means something to me. And John Lennon said, listen, I wrote it about like me sitting on the deck reading my newspaper. Like that's what it was about. And you kind of get a glimpse into that it's the music for them. It's the music first. And then they're kind of like working through lyrics, just trying to find the right groupings of words that fit the right way. Because if you look with Get Back, it was a protest song and all this other stuff. And then eventually it morphs into just a straight up pop song. So that's for me, the magic is to see that evolution. We just hear Get Back and say, he wrote Get Back and he must've wrote it that way. And it's like, not even close.
The magic literally transpires. I mean, you hear Paul McCartney say our best versions of ourselves is when we're backed up against the wall.
Yeah.
And they do it. We're going to do it. We're going to play it and it's going to sound great. And it was. And you get the sense that maybe this isn't going to sound that great, because if they couldn't get it right, they just keep working on these songs. And why they're great. Why didn't they move on to something else and do something else? And why didn't they get to that 14 song point, which they weren't able to achieve, with this particular project or this performance or whatever. But yet to see them walk out on that roof and just cut right into the song, and they do it so so great and so
Yeah, they had him
professional.
nailed. They had him nailed.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It was just,
Yeah.
it's amazing to see.
Yeah, it's like, oh,
Yep.
let's do it again. It came out really good. They roll through. It's like, oh, let's do it again. Let's do Get Back.
It's the interesting thing too for me was like what Peter Jackson said was very little footage from the original documentary was not used. He was very careful as not to use Michael Lindsay Hogg's actual, what he used for that doc. Only when absolutely necessary did he do. And you could see the moment where George and Paul are arguing or whatever.
That's it. That's in Let It Be.
Yeah, that footage is. But if you notice, that footage is blurry. Yeah. It's not as cleaned up as it is, in the rest of the doc. It's kind of like it's left in that state.
Yeah, I'm not going to
for that one scene, which I thought was really cool because it's like it's a dark moment.
Yeah.
So everything else is sort of brighter. So yeah.
Just to close it out, the funny thing is Paul's like, oh, I to George, I feel like I annoy you. And George Harrison says, you don't annoy me anymore. meaning you used to annoy me, but you don't annoy me anymore. He specifically says, you don't annoy me anymore, which means you used to annoy me, but not anymore.
You saw the glee in George and John's face when they when I forgot who it was, criticized the bass. It doesn't sound right, Paul. They're like, oh, Paul, you're not doing it right.
Not so perfect.
You're a little out of tune, Paul. Yeah.
Not so perfect.
Yeah.
That was funny.
But
oh,
Dean,
man.
My last thought, too, Dean, you mentioned musicians. I think anyone, I'm not a musician. I envy anybody who can play an instrument or carry a tune. But this is as close as you're going to get to jamming with the Beatles. I think if somebody watches this for 8 hours and has their guitar or their drums or their bass or whatever, it
might inspire you.
It's like being at a jam session, because it's just, this must be what it was like,
Absolutely.
If Billy Preston can jump in there, it's like
absolutely,
you feel like you're one of the Beatles. Yeah.
Good stuff. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it. I think we've hopefully advocated on behalf of at least checking it out. It is a big watch, but first of all, you need Disney Plus. So if you don't have Disney Plus, if you're a Marvel fan, you have Disney Plus. If you're a Star Wars fan, you have Disney Plus. So you get the Beatles for free then if you look at it that way, and you can check it out. But it's a Herculean task that Peter Jackson took on to wrangle all this stuff. He did make it coherent. There is a storyline, but there's just a lot of extra there. And if you're a Beatles fan, this is Nirvana for you. You're going to be in heaven. If you're into music and how the sausage is made, literally about songwriting, you're going to be into it as well. So I think it's got a little something for everybody. Absolutely. I think the three of us are saying, check it out. Mm-hmm. Is that a yay?
Oh, yes. Most definitely. Yep.
That's a yeah. Okay. That's all you're going to get out of me.
Oh my goodness! You did throw in that "Get Back," and I did a little bit of that to the song. There was an earlier,
I was doing the humming version of it. Yeah, I was doing the no lyric version because that's the easiest one to do. Right? It's like I can do the Beatles too, like as long as it's the one with no lyrics. So Peter Jackson's "Get Back," 3-part miniseries on Disney Plus. Nick Leshi, writer, director. Blogger. You can check him out on City of Kick. We will link to his blog in our show notes as well. Thank you again, Nick Leshi, for taking the time and sharing your passion about the Beatles with us.
Always a pleasure, sir.
Thank you both. Always great talking to you, and can't wait to hear your next episode.
All right. Yep. It'll be this one. This is the next episode.
Oh, there you go.
It's called the self-fulfilling prophecy.
There we go.
So you can check us out on social media. We're at 3324 Podcast on Facebook and on Instagram. If you're into tweeting, we've got a Twitter account. It's at 3324P. We do live shows every other week. We stream those on Facebook and YouTube. So if you want to interact with us live, and Nick Leshi is there as well. We have a lot of fun. It's a blast there. Find us there. Check us out. It's a great time. For Eric, for Nick, this has been Dean, and we will see you on the flip side.
You've been listening to the 3324 Podcast with Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please like, subscribe, and rate to become a part of the 3324 family. Your feedback is important, so make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 Podcast and on Twitter at 3324P to join the conversation.